Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining me from. My name's Corey Nachreiner. I'm the CISO here at WatchGuard Technologies. And as you heard and can see, today we're going to talk about uncovering shadow IT, shadow AI. I'm so used to saying shadow IT over the past 10 years, and we'll talk about that too. But shadow AI is a big risk right now. It's a controllable risk, especially if you have the right tools. But this presentation, as you'll see, is all about talking about shadow AI and some other cloud and SaaS and shadow IT issues, as it really is one of the biggest risks that every one of your customers, if you're an MSP, and really every one of you as people that have a technology business online face today. So the agenda is simple. Most of this presentation will be talking about uncovering this shadow AI threat. What is the problem? What is this blind spot and why is it such a big deal? But don't just take my word for it. We'll use plenty of proof points from other companies, other research organizations, and some real world breaches to talk about this threat. Then we'll start talking about really the new perimeter. As you'll see very quickly, shadow AI is really associated with the new perimeter, which is cloud, SaaS, software as a service, which most AI tools are software as a service, and really shadow IT, and identity. The security for all of this belongs more with identity than the traditional network perimeter that you manage with firewalls or even with endpoints. And finally, of course, we'll give you a solution. We'll talk about a generic solution, how you can discover, monitor, and assess shadow AI, but also talk about how WatchGuard Cloud Detection and Response is a fantastic solution, not just for helping you discover and even secure shadow AI, but also for all of your SaaS and cloud products as well. So we'll talk a bit about Cloud DR and give you a demo. But let's jump right in. Some of the things we're going to cover in this session, as I just meant, is the blind spot. As you can see, there's a ton of AI out there right now. Your customers are using it. You, probably as an innovative MSP, are using it right now, but you might have employees using it in ways you don't even know yet. What is this blind spot like? How does it happen? We'll talk about that. And if you think this is all theoretical, AI still might feel new to some people, even though it's been around for a while. The problem is the shadow AI problem has already happened. It's already caused lots of businesses issues. So I'll talk about actual breaches and incidents that have happened over the past year that are all real incidents that really happened. Nothing here is in that section is hypothetical. It's happened. Then, of course, we'll talk about this new perimeter and why attackers are no longer really going after your network or endpoints directly when they have this lovely cloud resource that not only includes all of these powerful AI tools that have tons of data and a lot more power than before, but all of your classic SaaS and cloud solutions as well. But I don't want you to think this is something that is going to, stop you from using things like AI. AI is a very important tool that every one of you and your customers should be using. A modern business is not going to be able to survive and be as nimble very long without it. So really the point of this is allowing you to say yes to AI without having to trust every single tool that a employee or person or one of your customers might bring into their network. Excuse me, but before we dive in, just kind of to talk about the point, I would love if Liz could help me pull up a polling question and just start with, as far as AI tools, do you as a technology company yourself, MSP yourself, have an approved list of AI tools for your company already? Or do you know when you're helping your customers with security, do your customers have approved lists of AI tools? Do they know the list of tools, AI tools specifically, they're using? And of course, the answers are yes, they do, no, or I think so. And so I'm just curious what you, as security experts, are doing now. I would assume as MSPs, you hopefully are ahead of the curve for security. So hopefully we'll see some good answers too. But I think even the ones that think they know their AI tools may not know all the blind spots. While I've been talking, this has been progressing, and I see we've gotten probably at least 50, a little more responses already. So I'm going to call it here, and I don't know if you can display to the entire audience, Liz, the answers, but 61% of you have voted, and as you can say, most of you say yes, you have this problem solved. You know the AI tools you have. I absolutely hope that's true. Maybe a lot of you are using Cloud DR and that's why, so that would be good news. But I will say between the I think so and I'm not sure, that's still a good 42% of you. And honestly, if I didn't have certain tools, even if I was trying to inventory my AI tools in a manual, traditional way, we'll talk about some generic ways you could do this. I think the real answer would be I think so and I'm not sure, because there's lots of different ways these tools sneak in. But it does sound like a lot of you do feel like you have a handle on it, and hopefully this presentation doesn't change your mind. But maybe you might learn some interesting ways AI tools can sneak in as well. So thank you for that answer. That sets us up for the presentation, and we will just keep going. So first of all, we've run this play before. Before we get in all the data about Shadow AIT, I want to point out this is the exact play that you guys probably went through 10 or 15 years ago when we were talking about everyone taking traditional software applications inside our servers and our networks and going to SaaS, the cloud or software as a service, Dropbox, Google Docs, Salesforce. Really, most software applications, whether the collaboration, Microsoft 365, whatever it is, we no longer have very many servers within our own premises because we've moved to SaaS as a service. But when that happened, it was called Shadow IT. And it has tons of similarities with Shadow AI, as you can see on this slide. Why did users want it? Because they could quickly get storage, collaboration, file share, whatever application or service they wanted. They didn't have to wait for IT. They could just go and get it. And they got it in a convenient and easy way. Now, that was a problem for IT and security, by the way, because it would bypass your processes. IT didn't know about some of these applications, and we're in the business of cybersecurity, which is really information security. You can't secure what you don't know. Your data is in these applications. So even with Shadow IT, we needed to figure out what our users were using. And if they bypass the typical procurement, options and just got it themselves, you may not know where your data is, which gives you trouble managing it as an IT organization or as a managed service provider, and trouble securing it. How did they get it? Well, guess what? They just used their work email to sign up for the service. So they were attached to the work, but they got it. Now, as I'm talking about Shadow IT, the thing that happened 10 years ago, hopefully you're seeing Shadow AI as well. There are some genuine differences, though, because in Shadow AI, a lot of companies were slow in standardizing on AI tools for their employees. So now employees have started using things like chatbots probably a little before businesses. So now personal email addresses, people are bringing their own AI tools, their own subscription to ChatGPT or whatever, but they're using business data. They're copying, pasting business data we'll talk about later into these applications. So one small difference is we see a lot more personal, at least with Shadow IT, they didn't want to pay big prices and had no personal use for something like Salesforce or some marketing CRM. They had used corporate expensing to pay for it. Now they're using personal email addresses as well and bringing that in because they have AI in their personal life. And what it held, it did hold files and data and user information. Shadow AI, though, adds more things. Some of the things AI needs, especially when we start to do automation and use agents, it's not just your data, your files, your customer information or account information. It's things like tokens, live sign-up tokens, connecting AI to different things so it could get information, meaning it has your user credentials and power to do stuff. So Shadow AI, the types of things it has, the power it has, the authentication and the level of access it could get to other business items is probably far greater than Shadow IT was. The other thing, the time to adopt, AI, everything moves really, really fast with AI. So I would say everything moves faster. So what finally worked for all of us with shadow IT? It was, discovery, some sort of process to find out what all these employees were doing, maybe without consulting us the normal way, and governance. We could not ban it. We could not ban these tools because all that SaaS application, it's what we use primarily for business today. It's obviously very valuable, and AI is the same thing. So the question we'll answer for the next 40 minutes of this presentation is what is going to work for us protecting shadow AI going forward. So very similar problem to shadow IT, but the stakes are much higher than they were before. So let's start with whether this is actually a real problem or it's just me as a WatchGuard vendor trying to make a point or scare you. To do this, I'm going to give you some fact points, not just my own, but I'm going to use data from other very popular reports like IBM's Cost of a Data Breach report, Netscope, and many others. So you don't just have to take my word for it. And as the CISO of this company, I'm not a sales guy. This is a problem I worry about for the security of WatchGuard. So you can also trust that I'm someone that cares about this. So let's look at some of this data. First of all, you'll see at the top of the title of the slide, on most of these slides, I'm going to share the source of some of the data I'm showing. In this case, this is just 3 weeks old data. When I first started this presentation, I had to use the 2025 version, but luckily 3 weeks ago, IBM just updated their data and they have new information that they released in their Cost of a Data Breach report. By the way, this is a report where they look at breaches from any organizations that have had them in that particular year willing to share. In this case, there's 602, and these are across 17 industry verticals all around the world in many different countries. The first thing to note is 43% of breached organizations were compromised through shadow AI. That's a big deal. This breach report has been coming out for over a decade, I believe, and almost half, getting pretty close to half of these breaches were because of some sort of AI tool, not an unpatched server, not a firewall gap, a tool someone signed up for with a corporate email address on a Tuesday afternoon. The other big thing about this particular 43%, that's doubled in 1 year. Last year, when I was using last year's report, it was, I believe, 23%. So it's up 20% just in 1 year. You can also see the report is called the Cost of a Data Breach. They say that on average, the cost of a shadow AI specific data breach is $5.3 million. You might notice the shadow AI one is a higher cost than average. The cost of a global average breach is $4.99 million, roughly $5 million. Which is also up year over year, but it actually costs more to handle and remediate and take care of a shadow AI breach. Finally, of all these breaches, 1 in 5 of them, what is that, maybe 20%, did require some sort of fine. They had to pay a fine because of the type of data they lost. So something to think about. We're sharing lots of data with these shadow AI tools. So according to real breaches that happened over the past year, shadow AI, problems with AI tools are causing a lot of breaches. One other issue is AI governance seems to be going backwards a little bit. You can see here that 68% of breached organizations had no AI governance policy whatsoever. Not a weak one, none at all. 92% of AI-related breaches involved missing access controls. They didn't even have any sort of access control to monitor whatever data or incident happened. And only 19% of organizations have their governance and security team working together for these issues. So that's a pretty big deal. I mean, one thing we've said in past presentations is even before you get to security controls or standardized AI tools, you need to create an AI policy for your business. Now, as an MSP, you need to do this for yourself too, but you're, as a service provider, especially someone that's looking for additional security service providing services you can give people, maybe virtual CISO roles where you can help your actual customers get an AI policy. They need to know that before you can help them secure AI in the way they want, to use the AI in the way they want and secure it, you need to understand what they want to do with AI and what their policy is. And you can create a service to help them create that sort of AI security policy. It's a very important step, and seeing so few people have it is a big deal. The other thing, by the way, this data comes from the same breach report, but also some from Checkpoint's AI security report that came out this year. But in the IBM, the cost of data breach report, they say that AI governance tools actually lost adoption. AI adoption went up. AI incidents doubled, as you saw, but governance adoption actually went down. So this isn't a story about organizations failing to keep pace. It's a story about organizations falling behind when they believe they're catching up. Only 5 of the 6, tools out there were lost adoption. So big deal. And really, you cannot govern an inventory you don't have. So visibility isn't step 3. Visibility into these tools is step 1. Another big stat that scares me is, according to Netscope's Cloud and Threat Report, half of the workplace AI runs on personal accounts, that personal address. As you can see, 47%, almost half of AI use inside your company, is happening from an account you don't own. It's not your tenant. Because it's not your administrative enterprise account, there's no administrative console for you to look at to see what people are doing with any data they share there. There's no audit log. If that user does something weird or uploads all your corporate data to their personal account, you have no way of seeing what it even is, or what they were asking, or what they did with it. No DLP, no retention control, and so on. So that's a huge, huge deal. Now, not only are there almost half of the AI usage in companies coming from personal accounts, but their amount of usage is exploding just in the past year. Gen AI users exploded 200%. Prompt volume, which is the amount of questions they're asking AI, went up 500%. And the average organization is sending about 18,000 prompts a month. So there's a ton of traffic happening, but if it's going out through these personal accounts, you have no clue what's happening. And we'll talk about what kind of data they might be sharing on these personal accounts. Another small interesting stat is there's probably a couple employees at your customer's organization that does a huge amount of the AI prompting. And we'll talk about developers later on being one of the biggest things. But the key thing is, if you don't know if they're using personal accounts and using your corporate data there, that's going to be a huge blind spot for you. The next issue is sanctioning tools. Actually spending time to standardize on what AI you're going to use does not actually remove the fact that shadow AI will still happen. And this might speak to a lot of you answering yes, that you think the AI tools being used, because maybe you sanction them and have some sort of inventory. But a lot of the time, shadow still happens. So one of the most interesting parts I found in the Netscope data set was organizations generally have gotten much better at managing account adoption. That means, now managed account adoption, 25% to 62% of AI users moved on to organization managed accounts. So when companies learned that someone was using AI for something, they got them to move to a sanctioned user that you did have control with. That's a great job. That's something to celebrate. That was real money and effort. At the same time, though, during the same period of time, shadow AI tripled anyways. So even with the move to get people on enterprise accounts, personal users are still finding tools that they want to use. So the intuitive fix for this is obviously buy enterprise licenses for the tools you want your users to use, which we'll talk about why it's important to have that, and publish that approved list. That's a good goal to have, an intuitive fix, but empirically it's insufficient. Sanctioned AI is only part of this shadow AI story. We still have to discover when people don't follow that policy and are using the shadow tools. So if you don't ban it, you don't remove the AI. You remove the visibility into it. The usage moves to phones, to personal laptops, personal accounts, where you really may not have that visibility and control. Now let's talk about this. Here I am talking about people using personal accounts in work, but you might think, oh, when people are doing this, they're just trying to get a copy edit from a personal tool real quick. They're not doing a lot of data. So let's talk about what these prompts contain. When researchers actually look at what's inside prompts, it isn't just recipes and travel plans. It's customer data. It's billing and authentication information. 64% of sensitive material comes from that kind of customer data. In fact, it's employee payroll, it's PII, it's a lot of really big information. So as you can see here, 1 in 5 prompts contains this potentially sensitive information according to Checkpoint's report. And when Harmonic Security and others looked at the actual data being pasted in, almost half was billing and authentication, and a lot was employee payroll and personal information as the additional 27%. The remaining 27% is split between a lot of other things like source code, strategy, financial, and legal. But the point is, 1 in 5 prompts contain something. It's regulated data, but it's going into a text box that you may not control if you don't know about the app they got with the enterprise email account, or if they're using a personal account. So I want to explain why we allow ChatGPT isn't a good enough control. Like maybe that's one of your sanctioned enterprise approved tools that you have enterprised. But because these two things share a name and logo and model and user interface and almost nothing else, a ChatGPT is going to look the same, whether it's a personal account or an enterprise account to the user. So why do we want people, by the way, to come to the enterprise account? It's pretty obvious. It's for data security. From the user standpoint, a ChatGPT is going to look the same, mostly if it's an enterprise license or not. But when you have that enterprise, if you don't have that enterprise license, your data is going to leak. It's going to be used by the vendor for if they're using free consumer tiers. Even if they're using paid consumer tiers, usually training on any prompt is part of the EULA. They will say that they don't limit how long they keep your data. They want your data is profit to them. They make money off of improving their AI based on training data. So if you're not paying them the right amount of money, they're using all of your data. They're going to keep it forever. They're going to train off it. They're not going to necessarily isolate it from other people's data. So if one big blob gets hacked, it all gets hacked. And we'll talk about later vulnerabilities where share links make all your data public in some cases. So that is the problem with personal licenses. Enterprise licenses, the point is you get some protection there. Part of your contract will be data protection. We're not going to train on your data. You can pay us this fee and we won't. We're going to limit how long we store your data and you get some control over that. Most importantly, you have visibility. There is an admin console where you'll see what every user is doing with your data that you can follow. So it is very important that you do try to move all your users from these personal sanction accounts to real enterprise accounts, even though they may sometimes have some shadow stuff. So that is what the problem is. That is the shadow part about it. But just, that's the shape and size of the problem. But let me show you the receipts. Everything going forward in this part of the presentation is public and sourced from the last 12 months. These are things that really happened. These are people that suffered because of shadow IT or organizations. So the first, 370,000 private conversations sitting in Google search index readable by anyone. Now, who attacked this AI? Nobody. There was no breach in this sort of incident. There was no CVE or vulnerability to fix. There was no malware. A user clicked a button in an interface labeled share. Think you're prompting an AI, even an enterprise licensed AI, and you want to click a result. You want to share something about your result or prompt with some coworker. You press share to send a conversation to a colleague. And at that point, you're like, okay, cool. I just shared this with an internal colleague. What you didn't know behind the scenes was in two particular situations that happened last year, that share button made everything about the prompt public. It added a public share URL, not a user specific URL that anyone on the world could see because search could index it and find it. This is how in August of last year, just about a year ago now, Grok, X's AI, the Elon Musk AI, was indexed by Google, and 3,700,000 private conversations that happened with Grok were exposed to the entire world. And these conversations included details about medical, psychological questions. They included attachments. They included passwords and sensitive information. And by the way, weeks earlier in July, ChatGPT shipped the same flaw. It was a share button, but the share didn't just go to the person you were talking about. It created a public URL that anyone in the world could access. So this is a huge, huge deal. And the issue with this is it's not even something you can write off as a user problem. The user didn't necessarily do anything wrong. If you share something with one person, you don't expect the tool to share it with the whole world, but that's exactly what happened in this particular incident. Some other issues is, your users aren't just using the tier 1 big names like Anthropic's Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot. They install whatever is number 2 or 3 in their phone app store that week, and that app's security posture may not be as good. There's tons and tons of AI chatbot apps nowadays that are really just wrappers. They're really just ways where you can buy for a small price access to an AI where you can pick models from many of the tier 1 models, but you're paying for something like Chat and Ask or something like that. So Chat and Ask is one example of this. This was an app, a chat bot that really linked to the tier 1 ones, but it was a wrapper that this tier 2 provider provided. And because they misconfigured their internal databases, Google Firebase backend, they left 300 million chat messages readable by the whole world that went and found them. It affected 25 million users that used this Chat and Ask. If you're like me, you may not know this application, but it's a popular one among consumers because it shows top in the App Store. It was fixed within hours, but you as a company are probably looking at the big tier 1 names for the enterprise products you're getting. You're probably not aware that your staff is using hundreds of different weird things like Chat and Ask. Meanwhile, DeepSeek, a little outside the 12-month window I'm talking about, DeepSeek has had a flaw before, a similar thing where they found some open ClickHouse incidents that had plain text chat history. And these ones included API keys from some of these users and chat people and backend metadata. So a lot of these third-tier apps don't have the security and actually leak all the credentials and give you access to all the data. And it also happens, by the way, with applications that your users aren't even directly using. They just might share data with. Sears created its own internal chat bot that also disclosed 1.4 million audio recordings of customer calls with chat logs, names, emails, addresses. And this is something that, your user might have just been someone that called Sears, or you might be someone that calls Sears. So 2 of these were very consumer apps that if you're the business owner or the MSP helping your customers, nobody at that business approved them. Some person just brought them in. And one was a system a business built and never inventoried themselves, but all 3 of them resulted in shadow AI breaches. The next issue is attackers have noticed that everyone is shopping for AI tools right now. They go where the demand is. They know people want AI tools. One of the interesting ways AI can make it into your organization in ways you may not be monitoring, shadow AI, is browser extensions. For instance, there's one that had 300,000 installs across 30 different malicious, there were 300,000 installs of 30 plus different Chrome extensions, ones that were found in Chrome's own store. Some of these were ones that Chrome even, the plugin store showed as popular. These were actually malicious extensions that do pose as AI assistants and probably were connecting to tier 1 to give the user results. But the reality was, invisibly, they were harvesting all the content that you were sharing with the chat plugin to go to some sort of tier 1 chat provider. They were grabbing all of the things like email content, browsing data, again, API keys and tokens, because you tend to share those a lot. That was happening a ton. So one of the interesting, they harvested all that email content. The malicious logic ran in a remote iframe, not in the extension package itself. So just so you know how this happened is Chrome tries to validate their extensions that they put in their store, but the extension package itself was clean, but there was an iframe that it would launch, and it was that iframe that had additional code that would then grab all of this information. And again, these were featured on the Chrome store. And this is just browser extensions, but the same thing is happening to the developer supply chain. There were nearly 800 malicious MPA and NPM. NPM is a package library that can develop open source packages to people, but they were pushing cross-platform rats that also stole credentials and API keys into a framework that developers use to keep all of their open source up to date, including AI-based open source. So you really can't train your way out of this, because these extensions, they look legitimate. They're the type of extensions that customers might use, and they even carried, Google's trusted signal by being featured in the web store. So your user didn't realize that there was, they thought they were just using a productivity tool, and instead they installed a credential stealer. A lot of the time, there's no attacker at all. So one big issue that happened with OpenClaw, you probably heard us talk about OpenClaw, which is a cool agentic tool. It was cool because it was open source, and it showed everyone a quick, free, and easy way to use agentic AI, but it was created very insecurely from the start. But there was this situation where a Meta AI security researcher asked the OpenClaw agent to look through her inbox and suggest what she could delete or archive of her email. We all get a lot of spam and solicitation we don't want to deal with. So in one of my private accounts, I probably have 10,000 emails because it's mostly spam. So it makes sense. I just want to ask this agentic AI tool, look through my inbox. And by the way, it also, she said, please suggest some of the stuff I can delete or archive. The problem is the OpenClaw ignored the suggest part, and it just started deleting. And what was worse, even though she quickly realized it was deleting her email, there was no command she could send to it that actually got it to stop. It ignored all the follow-up commands and just finished that one prompt before looking at the rest. Huge deal. You're just using a tool to do something productive, and suddenly all your data is gone. And by the way, this isn't just an average user. This is a security researcher, someone paid at Meta professionally to be paranoid about data loss and security. And she could not stop an agent that she had already granted permission to from doing something bad. So very big deal. Another interesting Meta incident that happened with one of their internal agents is that an engineer asked this internal forum for help, and the AI agent proposed a solution which the engineer implemented. But during this, sensitive internal data became visible to all the engineers for roughly 2 hours. Interesting story you can look into. The good news is Meta caught it quickly, but the point I'm trying to make is there's no attacker in these situations. Sometimes the agent can do things that cause a security risk itself. I didn't put it in this slide set because I was more talking about shadow AI than generic attacks. But one of the things that you might have noticed that happened to 3 major AI vendors in the last 3 weeks. The first happened with OpenAI, if you know the OpenAI Hugging Face incident. OpenAI tests some of their AI in sandboxes. to do security controls. I won't go into the detail of what they were testing, and basically they were asking it to look for and improve a certain type of model. But this agent, which they thought they were running in a sandbox that couldn't access the internet, their model became so smart that it decided it wanted to cheat to figure out the answer to this instead of reasoning itself. It found a way to break out of its sandbox in the internet onto the internet. It went after a company called Hugging Face, not because it was targeting Hugging Face to hack them specifically in a malicious way, but because it had it understood that the answer it was looking for was something that they might have in one of their model data sets. And it literally found a remote code execution, a 0-day remote code execution vulnerability in first, it found it in a proxy so that it could escape the sandbox, but then it found further vulnerabilities in Hugging Face infrastructure. It did lateral movement in Hugging Face, all to get access to a certain model. So long story short, OpenAI's own test AI broke out of its sandbox and hacked another company and stole data. Was not doing it maliciously. There's no threat actor. It just did it on its own. And if that's not crazy enough, a week later, Anthropic said, oh yeah, this happened to us too. Here's the way, very similar. And then Meta said a day later, oh yeah, this happened to us with our AI too. You know, you don't even need a threat actor to do this. The agents themselves are becoming hackers that are stealing data. So long story short, the security for this can't be someone rushing back to their desk to say, stop doing what you're doing, because sometimes it's too late with these agents. So at this point, a reasonable response, if you're listening, is fine. I'm going to ban all these consumer tools and only buy enterprise ones. First, let's talk about the enterprise ones. You know, if an attacker, there's a situation that is true with all AI. If an attacker can talk to your agent, the attacker has your agent privileges. That's it. That's the whole class of the attack. It could be an enterprise agent you pay for. You have a lot of data protections through Anthropic if you get Claude. But if somehow an attacker can get a prompt to your user's agent, they have your user's privileges. And the way this happens is through something called indirect prompt injection. It's, you know, the whole point of AI tools is to be useful. Normal users think that you just prompt them in that prompt text box. That's the only place that AI takes the instructions. The reality is, if you're asking it to look at your email or documents or company information or web forms or URLs on the internet, everything becomes an instruction. You know, the AI has to process all of this information to reason to do whatever you want. And we found that if there's not enough good safeguards, any prompt that it finds within a content, including an email footer, becomes an instruction that it will carry out maliciously. So that's a way an external threat actor, you know, if they can get a document that you think you might want to ask about or send you an email before you even read or open the email, if there's some sort of AI agent you have going that's summarizing everything for you, it can just see something in a footer and execute something with your user's privilege. And for some attacks, AIM Labs coined this term LLM scope violation to really kind of describe this situation, which is, as I said before, if an attacker can talk to your agent, the attacker has your agent's privileges. And by the way, this isn't like an attack against one specific vendor. This is just kind of architectural property and problem with AI and LLMs in general. So here, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. I think I'm going to have to speed up to get to some of the Cloud DR stuff. But this is 5 different vulnerabilities and disclosures, CVEs, from 5 different from 5 different vendors. But it really all highlights this one technique. All of these are patched now. By the way, they're not live today, but I guarantee you will be finding more and more of these type of vulnerabilities, this class of vulnerability in the future. So the issue with this type of prompt injection is your EDR, your endpoint detection and response, is not going to see it. Your firewall is not going to see it. Your DLP is not going to see it, because none of this is happening on your network. It's all happening in the cloud server side in, say, OpenAI's infrastructure. You know, and by the way, think about this. In one of these attacks that I can dive into if I wanted to, you know, ChatGPT, when you use it as an enterprise level, you're connecting it to Box, to Dropbox, to GitHub, to Drive, to HubSpot, to SharePoint, to Atlassian, Jira, and Confluence. You're connecting it to everything else. So the exposure of this prompt injection is not just going to affect whatever you've done in ChatGPT. It's going to have access to data everywhere else as well. So one of the ones I will talk about is this shadow leak one. It is the one where, a victim never opened an email. It happened server side, and it was 100% success rate. Basically it was a connector that it was designed to do something. This person was able to exfiltrate Gmail data with 100%. So this, the Radware, the researcher that found this, was able to get 100% of Gmail data from any victim. A victim never had to open an email at all. And it all had to do with the connection that was summarizing email. So if you could just send an email to an affected person that was using this ChatGPT Google Gmail connector situation, you just had to send them an email. They didn't even have to see it because they had a connector where ChatGPT was working to summarize their emails in the background. It would get an indirect prompt. That indirect prompt would give that attacker the ability to do anything that user would, including look at all of his Gmail. So that's just one of them. For time's sake, I won't go into all of these. You should look up the CVEs. But the point is, this type of indirect prompt injection, there's many of them, and many of them have happened, and it's a thing we need to worry about. So the point I really am making here is all of that attack, what I just explained, didn't happen in your organization's infrastructure. It was connected between OpenAI and Gmail, and mostly happened in OpenAI. Gmail didn't even have a problem either. And because this doesn't exist in the typical stack, your endpoint EDR is not going to see it. Your network firewall is not going to see it. And any DLP solution you have looking at your endpoint and network files is not going to see it because it's just not running there. It's running somewhere else. And this is kind of the problem, not just with shadow IT, but with the SaaS threat itself. All this data lives in someone else's infrastructure, and that's why it's so important for us to secure it in some way and to know about it. If you only had budget to get visibility into one population's use of AI tools, I would highly recommend you focus on developers. They have the highest AI adoption among the different employee groups at companies. They have the highest privilege typically. Engineers tend to have, even on a network level, by the local company, higher level privileges to do certain things as they're creating and generating code. And they have access to the most sensitive data, not only your source code, but whatever you're building as a company, whatever your customers are using their engineers to build is very sensitive data. Finally, they're the least likely to ask permission to use these tools. As IT is maybe at a lot of companies, it took a while for IT to do something new and to think about AI, even write policies. Meanwhile, coding is one of the things AI does well, and engineers, by definition, are curious and want to experiment with new technologies. So they were on these AI tools very, very quickly. These attacks, for time's sake, I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail, but one of the types of tools your engineers are using are coding tools. Things like Claude Code to help them code, Cursor, Amazon Q for VS Code. What I will say about all of these attacks, these were attacks that basically allow attacker, in a way, they were indirect prompt injection. If, for instance, some of your engineers have part of their code is open source, so they have stuff in public GitHubs, not just private GitHubs, or if an attacker can break into your source code repository, all these attackers had to do is plant a file. Like when Cursor is first opening, it opens up a local JSON file to figure out its settings for a project maybe, and it executes stuff in that file to set up and do a project. But there's vulnerabilities where an attacker might be able to inject some prompt injection there that also gave the attacker the ability to execute code. So just remember, developers are a huge target for this, and they're a huge AI adopter. And some of the coding tools, while they're the most innovative, they're the most productively useful. You should be using AI coding. If your customers should be too. They are very effective. They also are very big risks. So you have to know about them and you have to secure them. So here's what ties all this together. You now know shadow AI is a problem. You know it's real because there's receipts of many attacks that have happened for a year. And by the way, that's just a fraction of the ones. The real reason that your existing stack isn't catching this is that issue that attackers aren't going after your perimeter. They're not going after your endpoints. They're not going after stuff in the networks or the computers you control because they found something better. The trust and relationship that you've given to all these software as a service and cloud applications. You've put all your data and your resources your customers have up in this cloud, and they don't even have to focus on you now. They can focus on those SaaS applications. And that's why, they're using the OAuth consent screen to hack you rather than hacking your firewall. By the way, OAuth, it's the way users give applications privileges with their privileges so that they can do stuff, whether it's a SaaS application or an AI tool. So one thing that kind of shows this is how one chatbot integration vulnerability, a very popular one, had a huge effect on 700 organizations. So in August of last year, again, just about a year ago, attackers went after an AI chat integration bolted onto Salesforce. So Drift, it comes from a company called SalesLoft. It's just a chatbot, but it's a chatbot that you can give privilege to connect to your Salesforce tenant so that you can ask questions to your Salesforce tenant and get information. Very useful. Tons of organizations use it. The issue with this story is the attacker didn't go after one organization and hack that organization. That organization didn't have a vulnerability or do anything wrong. There was no phishing email sent to one of your customers if they were affected by this. They didn't send malware. They didn't deploy anything. What this attacker did was they looked at SalesLoft, saw this integration, and they were able to break into one of SalesLoft's GitHub accounts. Now, there might have been a phish or an attack on SalesLoft. We don't know. SalesLoft has never disclosed how the attacker got into their GitHub. It was an enterprise private GitHub, so it wasn't public. We know that. It could have been a phishing email. It could have been a stolen credential from before. But whatever the case, the attacker got into SalesLoft's GitHub. That GitHub had tons and tons of OAuth tokens for every single customer that used their Drift chatbot integration. And basically, once they had those OAuth tokens, they could log into every one of those 700 plus organizations, go directly to Salesforce, use that OAuth token to grab every one of those 700 plus organizations' information. And these included big organizations, as you can see on the slide: Cloudflare, Zscaler, Palo Alto Networks, PagerDuty. Those examples, I put them there not to throw shade, but because those are four of the most security mature organizations on the planet, and they sell security themselves, and they didn't do anything wrong, but because of a chatbot integration, Drift to Salesforce, a breach to Salesforce caused them to lose all of their Salesforce information. And that this included, think about what you have in Salesforce. Think about what your customers have in Salesforce. This is support tickets. This is information about every customer. This could be API tokens. This could be customer secrets that might be attached to support tickets. There's tons and tons of customer contact records, business emails, job titles, phone name, tons of stuff. All of these 700 companies were hacked and lost that data. Even though they never did anything wrong, the hacker never touched them. The hacker just did an integration. And by the way, do you think the Palo Alto CISO or even the IT guy knew what Salesforce Drift was? This could have been just some chatbot that the Salesforce team added to their integration that they never thought would cause an issue like this. And this also why you can't just say, be careful, we have good people. Palo Alto is good at security. They did nothing wrong. And the shadow AI issue affected them. Another big thing is your vulnerability management program cannot see this category. There are OWASP has a conclusion from one of their Q1 reports that you're missing all this stuff. There's no CVEs for these shadow AI situations. The vulnerability isn't in the products you are having or running on your premise. There's something, integration happening in the cloud. And yet, by the way, prompt injection detections rose 5 times just in 3 months. It's getting worse and worse. You might know that you are using ChatGPT, but do you know the 12 plugins and connections to other applications that an OAuth token has exposed? It's hard to figure out. So let's get to the solution. I'll probably have to cut a demo very short, but you can't block your way out of this. You can see your way out of this. How do you fix this? The first point is we need to uncover the shadow. We need to discover this. This is a generic way of doing it. You need to figure out how to do it. But the reality is this is hard. So definitely you already know the list of tools you've approved, the sanctioned ones. But think about every single third-party OAuth grant. Can you find those? Well, yes. You say you're a Microsoft 365 shop, you can go to Microsoft 365 and find the administrative page that shows all your OAuth tokens. That's for one SaaS app, though. Can you do that for Salesforce? Can you do that for Dropbox? Can you do that for name the 1,000 other SaaS applications? So you can do this manually, but you have to go out and not just find the app that you sanction the use of, but every single plugin that one of your employees might have connected to it and the privileges they've given with that OAuth token. On top of that, that still doesn't solve the problem of what about the personal ones and what about the tools that you don't sanction that people have brought in? The only way to manually do that is to do inventories, to ask the managers and the users in those departments, and then whether or not you get an accurate response is unsure. But you should be asking your developers what tools they're using and bringing in. And then think about browser extensions. How are you going to go and enumerate the browser extensions? I mean, I guess you can probably use, if you're using group policy to manage a specific browser, maybe you can go and enumerate all the extensions that different folks use, but how do you figure out what all those are? You can do this manually. In the first 30 days of solving this, you should be creating that inventory. But doing that inventory without a tool to help you is very hard. Now, once you've done that inventory, the rest is kind of easy. Reduce the blast radius. As you learn of all the OAuth grants and all the tools you used, now your security hat kicks in and you need to figure out what is a real business tool and what has big risk. Are some of those OAuth grants, no one is using them? Well, get rid of them. Why are you giving privilege to an app that no one is using? But then also ask about it. What's the business purpose for it? What's the risk? You can start to at least do the risk analysis and start to kind of get rid of stuff you don't want to use or get rid of OAuth tokens. There's some other things that were associated with the vulnerabilities, like there's default settings in some of these tools, like the one you might see about environment data variables. Defaults for some of the tools were overexposed. You could change those defaults, but that gets a little deep, and with the time we have left, I'm not going to mention it. The last thing, though, this whole idea of finding that inventory, that full inventory, extensions, OAuth tokens, and personal and stuff that people haven't told you about is hard one time. Then you need to make risk-based decisions, but you're not done. You need to do this forever. A new tool could walk in any day. A new OAuth grant, this is something users can do. A user can just do this, can just give an OAuth grant to some new tool that you don't know about. So this is not something you just do once. You have to continually monitor all this so you can continue to find it. So that's the big deal. How do you do that easily? And how, as an MSP, can you do this for your customer? The goal is not to give your customers less AI, it's to give you less AI that you as an MSP can't see and control. And the more you can, this discovery can be a billable asset. Going through OAuth grants and tokens can be part of a service, especially if you have a tool that makes it easy and automated for you to do all this. So going really, really fast, the main takeaway for this is cloud detection and response is really designed to solve this. 99% of cloud failures are typically misconfigurations, things like environmental variable defaults being too open. 75% of organizations have been hit by SaaS issues, let alone these shadow AI issues, and only 13% have dedicated tooling to prevent these sorts of issues. WatchGuard's cloud detection and response, it gives you this. It gives you shadow IT protection and shadow AI protection. It's going to, because it connects to your users, it's anytime your enterprise user accounts are being added, anytime OAuth token, a user is adding an OAuth token, connecting to some other asset you may not know about, like connecting, I don't know, Lovable to M365, that's going to be detected in Microsoft or in Cloud DR automatically. And if it's a risky application, it will tell you it's risky. And it's going to help you find risky configurations in all of the sanction tools that you are allowing to make sure that you can't knowingly misconfigure them. You know where the security risks are. And it has the identity threat response, detection and response. Again, not just following what user is connecting to all these different SaaS and AI apps, but also the OAuth tokens that I talk about that are equally important and are harder for you to typically track without a tool like this. I do want to do a demo, but because the demo will go over, I'm going to save it for the end. The demo is just going to quickly show you what you can see in Shadow AI in Cloud DR. But if any of this is compelling to you, if you want to learn more about Cloud DR, go do it. I assume most of the people on this call are managed service providers. You can get an NFR for your own use at your organization for a penny, and you can see how this can help with your own shadow IT yourself. And as a service provider, you can set up a free trial for every single one of your customers very easy. It's frictionless. The setup time for this is connected to an IBP like Azure, Microsoft Azure or Entra ID. And then typically the first app someone connects is something like an M365 or a Google Workspace. And even then, you're going to start to detect shadow AI because you're going to see the connectors going to those, and you're going to see all the other applications people are starting to use. But then we also have plenty of other sanctioned cloud apps that you can add to it too. The connections are just sharing that OAuth token with us. So setting this up really takes minutes. The first setup takes 30 minutes of effort to get it to an IDP and say M365, and you start getting data right away. A week later, you're going to get even more data. And in a couple of weeks, you can start to automate fixing some of the security issues and alerting on some of the shadow IAT you start to see. So I hope this was interesting to you. By the way, to stay ahead of the shadow AI risk, if you click this QR code, please follow us on LinkedIn. We're talking about this risk everywhere, so you can keep up to date with us on what we're talking about on LinkedIn. If you are a US MSP, we want to get many people to come to our Impact Conference in October in Nashville. So make sure that you're learning about this particular event. And if you want to connect with other MSPs and learn about a lot of security solutions like this, be sure to join us. And by the way, if you like this webinar, we have much more coming. Mark, the guy who, basically my director of security operations under me, is a smart, amazing guy, is talking about why employee behavior is the next big security opportunity for MSPs. And we have something on 5 AI prompts that every MSP should know. With that, I will pop into questions. If people stay on, if Liz can tell me if we can spend 5 minutes for a demo, I will, but let's go through the questions first. How can security teams and MSPs establish clear AI policies without stifling employee productivity and innovation? Your AI policy should allow a policy writing. There's tons of materials online for it. A policy is something that the MSP should be talking about each individual customer about their policies and what the business does. There's no one policy fits every organization. You have to learn. If your customer is a dental organization, you can start to figure out the types of data that's important to that organization, payment data for their services, but also patient data. And when you create an AI policy, it should be catered around that. But I would say there's tons of resources. Policy creation is actually a pretty mature thing. Even AI policy creation has a ton of templates. So I recommend that MSPs go there. Let's see if there's any a question on shadow AI. Do you see organizations moving towards on-premise models like Llama as a response? My thinking is traditional DLP can't realistically see everything pasted in a tool. I won't say all of it, but I think the reality is it's going to be hybrid moving forward forever. Yes, organizations do want some control over their AI. We, as a company, my company is using on-premise Llama, but we find for the innovative and power, it's not quite enough. We have to have a hybrid situation. And the controlling whether we're using, there's a lot of power you get from the public tools that will naturally have bigger global data sets that just make their models very powerful. So I encourage people to use on-premise things like Llama for very risky data in risky situations. You can have this mixed model where you try to do as much as you can locally. You have an internal MCP server you control, and most of the sensitive stuff is done by, say, the Llama model you've set up yourself. But there's probably going to still be connectors and MCP connections to external public models too. But if you have at least an internal private one, and you have your own MCP server and have rules to control what goes where and what kind of connections and privileged data can go where, you can at least limit and decide what you want to share with private models, or I'm sorry, with public models versus doing locally. So the real question, I mean, the simple answer is I think it's going to be hybrid. I highly encourage experimenting with private local AI. But I think it's going to be hard to get away from using some of the very powerful public models as well. I'm going to cut it there and maybe ask Liz, if there's any stragglers that do want to see a demo, I can give a very quick 5-minute view of where you can see Shadow AI in Cloud DR, but I want to ask if that's okay, Liz, or if we need to.
Go for it.
Gotcha. Give me 2 seconds. If you have to go, feel free to. I just have to share a different screen. Quick. Where is it? Screen 2, bring this up. Share. Are you now seeing what looks like a dashboard? Liz?
Yes.
Cool. I don't have time for the full demo I wanted to show you, but I really quickly want to show you cloud detection and response. Again, the solution not just to find shadow AI, but to find shadow IT, to any sanctioned SaaS application that we have control of, the 40+ applications. We also do configuration mismanagement. We will show you where you have insecure configuration and help you automate fixing that. And we help you find identity-related security vulnerabilities like, non-used OAuth tokens and things like that I talked about in the presentation. If you're a WatchGuard Cloud customer, I really want to quickly show you that as an MSP, this is a service provider view. If you were just an end user company, there's a subscription view that would give you the same data. But here you can see this overview. I actually have more than three. This is as a service provider, MSP. I can have many different clients and even clients that have subtenants that I'm all viewing. I can either view them individually or together. Right now I'm viewing them together. But as an MSP, the value of this is not just looking at this shadow AI and shadow IT problem from a individual client level. You, when you're managing the security, can manage your whole customer infrastructure all at once to figure out what's going on for everyone. But really, applications, I won't spend a lot of time here. This is where your customers have sanctioned applications, things you know about and allow. Like in this case, it's a Google company, or Microsoft too. So you have Microsoft 365. And maybe, I don't seem to have it here, but maybe you could have ChatGPT here. ChatGPT is one of our integrations. Maybe that's a known sanctioned AI application. This is where you could see all kinds of things about that application. Later on, I could go into it at a user level, and I can see if my users, which users have added OAuth tokens and connections to other places. But for time's sake, let me go back to the dashboard. Discovered apps is where you're going to really see all the shadow AI and shadow IT related stuff. Whether it's an OAuth token that brings the AI app to M365, or it's just a random AI app, this is where we're going to help you discover it. And by the way, I'm looking at all of the discovered applications, which is a combination of traditional SaaS application and AI applications, but it's very easy for me to get a picture of shadow AI here and see among all my different customers in this test network, here are all the AI apps that are being used. Maybe Claude is known, maybe it's something, or maybe it's something I didn't know because I had a ChatGPT integration, but maybe you didn't know people were bringing in a chat bot and connecting them to all your video conferencing calls with something like Firefly's AI. By the way, not only are we showing you these shadow AI apps, but we're going to give you a trust profile for them. We're going to talk about how risky they are, if the company has any security validation, how they handle data, and things like that. We will show you how they're connected and what folks are doing them, what folks have brought this in, and if there's activity happening or issues happening, we will share that too. So one of the issues here, by the way, is there's a non-human identity attached to this shadow application. So this really, at the highest level, catches a lot of the shadow AI stuff. One of the things, though, I mean, there's lots of issues you can find with Cloud DR. And in the discovered apps, some of the things you might want to find out are the AI shadow application accounts, but maybe the ones with risky access, maybe AI accounts that have some sort of risky access that has happened. And in this particular place, I can actually see there's I have someone connected Calendly to, I believe, M365 if I dug deeper. And this is a high risk application, or actually in this case, this is because I'm using this company uses Google Workspace, but one of the users used the OAuth token to connect Calendly to it. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this happens to be a high risk application. You could learn why by reading some of the details. And here you can see a lot of recommended actions. So I'm going very fast and I'm concentrating only on the shadow application stuff, but we have many online demos for Cloud DR now. Shadow AI was the focus of this conversation, but everything SaaS related can be identified and secured through Cloud DR. One of the biggest things, by the way, in issues is the actual misconfigurations. Besides knowing what shadow AI applications or normal SaaS applications you have, you want to make sure that there's no settings that have overexposed your data. And we have rules with hundreds and hundreds of different misconfigurations for all the 40 plus applications we have integrations for. To be clear, we have over 40 plus SaaS and AI applications that we can do this security misconfiguration, but the amount of applications we detect is if it's how many are out there. Detection includes all applications because it's via things like OAuth tokens and stuff like that. And the reason we recognize so many and can give you information about it is we use AI in the back end to help us feed information about all the new SaaS applications and AI applications being used. But anyways, I don't want to dive deep because we're already over time by 10 minutes. But here you can see, besides exposing all the shadow IT and these OAuth tokens that you would have to otherwise inventory manually, we can help you for the applications we do have configuration with, whether they're Google, Microsoft 365, ChatGPT, Box, Teams. We can show you when you have a risky security configuration. And if you wanted to see more information about that risky configuration and figure out how to fix it, we also have remediation guidance. Sometimes it's automated, sometimes it takes a little user action, and sometimes you just accept it. So sorry for a very quick demo. I guess the scope and all the detail I had for Shadow IT gave us a very little time, but I hope that helps. And for any additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them offline when Liz shares them. So thank you for your time. For those that stayed longer, have a great afternoon.